The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Montana, as Virginia James clutched her bleeding arm and collapsed to her knees in the middle of the town square. It wasn't the physical pain that brought tears streaming down her face, but the sight of her father's lifeless body being dragged away by the sheriff's deputies. The crowd that had gathered to witness the public execution of the notorious James gang erupted in cruel laughter at her display of grief, their jeers cutting deeper than the bullet that had grazed her. "Ain't that sweet? Daddy's little girl crying over a no-good thief," someone shouted from the crowd, triggering another wave of mockery. Virginia had never been part of her father's outlaw activities, but in 1878, a woman's reputation was inseparable from that of her kin. Now, at 22, she found herself alone, wounded, and surrounded by a town that had condemned her without trial. The laughter grew louder as she tried to stand, her dusty blue dress stained with blood and tears. The humiliation burned worse than her injury, until suddenly a tall shadow fell over her trembling form. "That's enough," a deep voice commanded, silencing the crowd momentarily. Through tear-blurred vision, Virginia looked up to see a man she didn't recognize, broad-shouldered, with a weathered tan Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Without another word, he removed his bandana, gently covered her face to shield her from the crowd's prying eyes, and helped her to her feet. "Come on, miss," he said quietly, leading her away from the jeering townspeople. The crowd's laughter faded as the stranger guided Virginia down the main street. She couldn't see where they were going with the cloth covering her face, but his steady hand on her arm provided an unexpected anchor in her storm of grief. "Where are you taking me?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "Somewhere safe," he replied simply. "Name's Bennett Cooper. I work the Crawford Ranch outside town." When they were finally away from the crowd, Bennett removed the bandana from her face. Virginia blinked in the harsh sunlight, taking in the man who had intervened. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 26, with intelligent blue eyes and a jawline shadowed by several days' growth of beard. "Why did you help me?" she asked, wiping tears from her reddened cheeks. Bennett adjusted his hat and looked back toward the town. "No decent person deserves to be mocked while grieving." He paused. "I know who you are, Miss James, and I know you ain't your father." Virginia tensed. "You know nothing about me." "I know enough," he replied, gesturing to a small wagon hitched to a chestnut mare. "You need tending to that arm, and you need to get out of Silver Creek for a while. I'm offering both." Virginia hesitated, glancing back toward town. The sheriff would likely come looking for her soon, if only to run her out of town officially. With her father dead and her small home surely being ransacked as they spoke, she had nowhere to go. "I don't need charity from a cowboy," she said, though the defiance in her voice was undermined by the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Bennett's expression didn't change. "It's not charity. It's common decency, something this town seems to have forgotten." After a long moment, Virginia nodded and allowed him to help her into the wagon. As they rode away from Silver Creek, she couldn't stop the tears that came anew. But this time there was no laughter to accompany them, only the gentle rhythm of hooves and the quiet presence of a stranger who had shown her the first kindness she'd known in years. The Crawford Ranch sprawled across a picturesque valley with the majestic Montana mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. As Bennett drove the wagon past the main house toward a smaller cabin, Virginia noticed the curious glances from the other ranch hands working in the corral. "That's where I stay," Bennett explained, nodding toward the cabin. "Owner lets me have my own place since I'm the foreman. Won't you get in trouble for bringing me here?" Virginia asked, painfully aware of the stigma attached to her name. Bennett shrugged. "Mr. Crawford's a fair man. Besides, he's away in Helena for the next 2 weeks. By then, we'll have figured something out for you." Inside the cabin was simple but clean, a far cry from the chaotic household Virginia had shared with her father. Bennett gestured for her to sit at a wooden table while he gathered supplies to tend her wound. "How long have you known who I am?" she asked, as he carefully rolled up her sleeve to examine the bullet graze. "Saw you in town a few times," he replied, cleaning the wound with gentle efficiency. You were always at the general store or the church, never with your father during his business. Virginia winced both at the sting of the alcohol on her wound and at the mention of her father's criminal activities. I tried to get him to stop, she said quietly. After Mother died, he just changed. Bennett wrapped a clean bandage around her arm. People make their choices. Your father made his. His eyes met hers. Question is, what choices will you make now? The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable in the moment. That night, Virginia slept in Bennett's bed while he took a bedroll by the fireplace. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully as the day's events replayed in her mind her father's final moments, the town's cruel laughter, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who now snored softly across the room. Days stretched into a week at the ranch. Virginia's arm healed slowly, and she insisted on earning her keep by cooking meals and tending to the cabin. Bennett worked from sunrise to sunset, but in the evenings they sat together by the fire, their conversations growing deeper with each passing night. "Why did you become a cowboy?" she asked one evening as they shared a simple stew. Bennett smiled faintly. "Freedom, I suppose. After the war, I couldn't stand being penned in." He took a sip of coffee. "My pa wanted me to become a lawyer like him, but after what I saw at Gettysburg, I needed sky above me, not a ceiling." "You fought in the war." Virginia was surprised. He'd have been quite young, lied about my age, enlisted at 16. His eyes clouded with memories. Grew up fast. Virginia understood that kind of premature aging of the soul. "I was 15 when my mother died. Father started drinking, then gambling. The debts came, and then the robberies started." She pushed her stew around the bowl. "By the time I was 18, he was wanted in 3 territories. Bennett studied her face in the firelight. "Yet you stayed with him." "He was all I had left," she said simply. "And I always hoped I could save him somehow." The following day, while Bennett was breaking a wild Mustang in the corral, the ranch owner's daughter, Elizabeth Crawford, paid an unexpected visit to the cabin. Virginia opened the door to find an elegantly dressed young woman with a tight smile and appraising eyes. "So you're the outlaw's daughter Bennett's been harboring," Elizabeth said, letting herself in without invitation. "I returned early from Helena with father. He's quite interested to meet you." Virginia straightened her borrowed dress. "I'll be gone soon. I don't want to cause trouble for Bennett." Elizabeth laughed, the sound reminiscent of the townspeople's mockery. "Trouble? Oh, I think it's too late for that. Bennett has always had a weakness for strays." She picked up a cup from the table, examining it critically. "First it was that 3-legged dog, now it's you." "I'm not a stray," Virginia said, her voice stronger than she felt. "No." Elizabeth raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Then where will you go when you leave here?" "Back to Silver Creek, where they'll run you out on a rail. Or perhaps you'll follow in your father's footsteps. I hear robbery is quite lucrative until you get caught." Before Virginia could respond, the door opened and Bennett entered, his expression darkening when he saw Elizabeth. "Miss Crawford," he said curtly, "I didn't know you were back." Elizabeth's demeanor changed instantly, her voice becoming honey-sweet. "Bennett, darling, I was just getting acquainted with your guest." She moved toward him. "Father wants to see you immediately. There's talk in town about you helping the James girl escape after the execution." "I didn't escape anything," Virginia interjected, "and my father paid for his crimes. I'm not wanted by the law." "Perhaps not by the law," Elizabeth conceded with a sharp smile, "but Silver Creek has its own justice." She turned back to Bennett. "Father's waiting in the main house." After Elizabeth left, Virginia began gathering her few belongings. "I should leave before I cause you more problems." Bennett caught her hand. "No, this isn't about you. Elizabeth's been trying to get her father to agree to a match between us for years. She's just jealous." "Jealous of me?" Virginia laughed bitterly. "I have nothing, Bennett. My father was hanged as a thief, and I'm unwelcome in the only town I've ever known." "You have more than you realize," he said quietly, his calloused fingers still holding hers. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings, until Bennett reluctantly released her hand. "I need to talk to Mr. Crawford. Lock the door while I'm gone." When Bennett returned 2 hours later, his expression was grim. "Crawford's given me an ultimatum. He says you have to leave by morning or I lose my position here." Virginia nodded, fighting back tears. "I'll go tonight." "No." Bennett's voice was firm. He also offered an alternative. There's a parcel of land he's been trying to sell rough country but with good water. He'll sell it to me at half price if I take it now. How does that help? Virginia asked, confused. Bennett took a deep breath. Because I'm going with you. I've saved enough to buy the land and some cattle to start my own ranch. He hesitated. That is, if you're willing to come with me. Virginia stared at him, stunned. You'd give up your position here for me? You hardly know me. I know enough, he said, echoing his words from that first day. I know you're strong, kind, and deserving of a chance that Silver Creek won't give you. He stepped closer. I'm not proposing anything improper. There's a second cabin on the property where you could stay until you decide what you want to do. The offer hung between them, both generous and frightening in its implications. Virginia looked around the small cabin that had become a sanctuary. When would we leave? She asked finally. Dawn, Bennett replied, before Elizabeth can convince her father to change the terms. As the first light of dawn streaked the sky, Virginia and Bennett loaded their meager possessions onto his wagon. The parcel of land lay 30 miles north, in a valley that Bennett had described as forgotten by most, but favored by nature. Virginia sat beside him on the wagon seat, watching the Crawford Ranch disappear behind them. Are you certain about this? She asked as the sun rose fully above the horizon. Bennett looked at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. First time I've been certain of anything since the war ended. The journey took 2 days, during which they camped under the stars. Virginia found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone about her mother's love of poetry, about the small collection of books she'd been forced to leave behind in Silver Creek, about her dreams of someday opening a school. You still could, Bennett said as they sat by the campfire on the second night. The nearest school is over 20 miles from the new place. Children in the area have nowhere to learn. Virginia smiled at the thought. Perhaps someday. First, I need to help you build this ranch of yours. Ours, Bennett corrected softly, then quickly added. I mean, you'll have earned your share if you're helping build it. The land, when they finally arrived, was even more beautiful than Bennett had described. A crystal-clear creek cut through a verdant valley surrounded by gentle slopes covered in pine and aspen. The main cabin was weathered but sturdy, while the smaller one needed considerable work. It's not much, Bennett said as they stood surveying their new home, but it's a start. It's perfect, Virginia whispered, overwhelmed by the sense of possibility that stretched before them. The weeks that followed were filled with backbreaking work. They repaired the cabins, built corrals, and traveled to neighboring ranches to purchase a small herd of cattle and 2 additional horses. Throughout it all, Virginia found herself drawing closer to Bennett, not just physically, as they worked side by side, but emotionally, as the barriers between them gradually fell away. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the main cabin watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Bennett cleared his throat nervously. I've been thinking, he began, that it doesn't make sense for you to stay in that drafty cabin when winter comes. Virginia's heart quickened. What are you suggesting? Bennett turned to face her fully. I'm suggesting that I care for you, Virginia, more than I expected to and sooner than makes proper sense. His hand found hers. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see if what I feel might be something you could someday return. Virginia looked down at their intertwined fingers. And if I told you I already returned those feelings, Bennett's smile was brighter than the setting sun. Then I'd say we have something worth building alongside this ranch. Their first kiss was tentative, gentle, a promise of things to come rather than a demand for more. When they parted, Virginia saw in Bennett's eyes a future she had never dared imagine for herself. As summer faded into autumn, the ranch began to take shape. They named it Redemption, a word that carried meaning for both of them. News from Silver Creek reached them occasionally through passing travelers. Elizabeth Crawford had married a banker from Helena, and the town had moved on to new gossip. The James gang's demise old news now. On a crisp October morning, Virginia rode into the nearest town, Piney Ridge, to purchase supplies. Unlike Silver Creek, the small settlement held no knowledge of her past. To them, she was simply Miss Virginia from the new ranch in Elk Valley. The freedom of anonymity was intoxicating. At the general store, she was selecting fabric when she overheard a conversation between the storekeeper and a stranger. "Heard there's a new spread opening up in Elk Valley," the stranger was saying. "Man and a woman living there, not married from what I hear." The storekeeper shrugged. "Bennett Cooper's a good man. Paid cash for everything he's bought here. What arrangements he has with his companion ain't our business. Where I come from, a woman living with a man without the benefit of marriage is everyone's business," the stranger insisted. Virginia clutched the bolt of fabric, her knuckles white. Just when she thought she had escaped judgment, here it was again, following her to her new beginning. The storekeeper noticed her then. "Miss Virginia, didn't see you there. Don't mind Mr. Parsons here, he's just passing through." Virginia nodded stiffly and completed her purchase, riding back to Redemption with a heavy heart. When she returned, she found Bennett marking trees near the creek for cutting. "We need to talk," she said, dismounting. Bennett heard the distress in her voice and set down his axe. "What happened in town?" Virginia recounted the conversation, her fears spilling out. "I left Silver Creek to escape being judged for something I didn't do. Now I'm being judged for something I am doing living here with you." Bennett listened quietly, then led her to sit on a fallen log. "Virginia, I've respected your need for time and space, but maybe there's a simpler solution." "What's that? Marry me." The words came out plainly, without flourish. "Not because of what anyone thinks, but because I love you. I think I have since that day in Silver Creek when you stood up despite everything falling apart around you." Virginia stared at him, speechless for a moment. "Bennett, are you proposing to me because of town gossip?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm proposing because I've wanted to for weeks, but wasn't sure you were ready. The gossip just gave me the push I needed." He took her hands in his. "I want to build a life with you, Virginia James, a life where neither of us has to face judgment alone again." Tears filled Virginia's eyes, but unlike those she'd shed in Silver Creek, these were born of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in Piney Ridge's small church. The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of neighboring ranchers they had befriended and the local schoolteacher who had become Virginia's first friend in their new community. No one from Silver Creek was present, nor did they wish for anyone to be. As winter settled over Redemption Ranch, Virginia and Bennett found rhythm in their shared life. The smaller cabin was converted into a schoolroom where Virginia began teaching the children from nearby homesteads. Bennett's cattle thrived despite the harsh weather, and plans were made to expand the herd in spring. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fireplace in their cabin, Bennett presented Virginia with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a leather-bound journal with her new name embossed on the cover, Virginia Cooper. "I know how much you miss your books," Bennett explained. "Thought you might want to write your own stories now." Virginia traced the letters of her name, emotion welling in her throat. "Our story," she corrected softly. Bennett smiled. "It's a good one so far." "It is," she agreed, leaning into his embrace. "From tears to laughter. From being led away to finding home," he added, kissing her forehead. As snow fell gently outside their window, Virginia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had knelt in the dust of Silver Creek, weeping as a town laughed at her pain. Now she sat in the warmth of a home she had helped build, beside a man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. The following spring brought new life to Redemption Ranch. The cattle multiplied, the school attracted more students, and Virginia discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled Bennett with a joy that seemed to radiate from him as he worked, singing old trail songs that echoed across the valley. One warm afternoon in May, Virginia was tending the vegetable garden when she noticed a cloud of dust on the road leading to the ranch. Shielding her eyes, she made out a single rider approaching. As the figure drew closer, her blood ran cold. It was Sheriff Taylor from Silver Creek. Bennett emerged from the barn, instantly alert at the sight of the lawman. He moved to stand beside Virginia as the sheriff reined in his horse. "Mrs. Cooper," Sheriff Taylor said, tipping his hat. The use of her married name confirmed he knew exactly who she was. "Sheriff," Virginia acknowledged stiffly. "What brings you to Redemption?" The sheriff dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "I've come with news and, well, an apology of sorts." Bennett's posture remained tense. "What news?" "We found evidence clearing your father of the Garrison stage robbery," the sheriff said directly to Virginia. "It was the Halloran gang all along. Your father was guilty of plenty, but not that final crime he was hanged for." Virginia felt the world tilt beneath her. "You executed an innocent man." "Not innocent," the sheriff corrected hastily. "Just innocent of that particular crime. The town council felt you should know, and—" He reached into his saddlebag, producing a small leather pouch. "This belongs to you. It was your father's. Never got around to returning it." Virginia accepted the pouch with trembling hands. Inside was her mother's wedding ring and a faded photograph of her parents in happier times. "The town also voted to lift the informal banishment," the sheriff continued awkwardly. "Should you ever wish to return to Silver Creek." Bennett's arm encircled Virginia's waist protectively. "I think we're quite happy where we are, Sheriff." The lawman nodded, clearly relieved to be dismissed. "Can't say I blame you. For what it's worth, Mrs. Cooper, many folks regret how things were handled that day." After the sheriff departed, Virginia sat on the porch steps, the pouch clutched in her hand. Bennett sat beside her, waiting patiently as she processed the news. "It wouldn't have changed anything," she said finally. "Even if they'd known then what they know now, they still would have laughed." Bennett took her hand. "Probably, but we wouldn't be here if they hadn't." Virginia looked out over their land, the flourishing garden, the healthy cattle, the schoolhouse where children came to learn. She placed a hand over her growing belly, feeling the slight swell that represented their future. "No," she agreed softly, "and this is where I want to be." That night, she wrote in the journal Bennett had given her, recording not just the sheriff's visit but the journey that had led them to this moment. She wrote about the cruel laughter that had once cut so deeply, about the compassion of a cowboy who covered her face and led her away, about building a life from nothing but hope and hard work. In the years that followed, Redemption Ranch prospered. Virginia and Bennett welcomed 3 children, 2 sons, and a daughter who grew up strong and free in the valley their parents had claimed as their own. The school Virginia started eventually became a proper building with a bell tower, serving children from miles around. Bennett expanded the ranch until it was one of the most successful in the territory, known for its fair dealings and quality stock. But more than its business success, Redemption became known as a place of second chances, where Bennett and Virginia occasionally offered work to those needing to start anew, just as they once had. On their 10th anniversary, Bennett surprised Virginia by adding a wing to their cabin, a library filled with books he had been collecting secretly for years, ordered from catalogs and purchased during his cattle-selling trips to larger towns. "You once told me you dreamed of being surrounded by stories," he said as she stood speechless among the shelves. "Thought it was time that dream came true too." Virginia ran her fingers over the leather-bound volumes, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "I've been surrounded by the best story of all," she said, drawing him close. "Ours." In the autumn of their lives, when their children had grown and started ranches of their own, Virginia and Bennett would often sit on their porch watching the sunset paint the valley in the same colors they had admired on their first evening at Redemption. Their hands, now weathered and wrinkled, would find each other as naturally as breathing. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to my rescue that day?" Virginia asked one such evening, her gray-streaked hair catching the golden light. Bennett smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Not rescue, Virginia. I just offered a hand when you needed one. You did the rescuing yourself by being brave enough to start over." Virginia leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their grandchildren playing near the creek where they had once marked trees for cutting. "They laughed as I wept," she mused quietly, "but look at all the joy that followed." Bennett kissed the top of her head, his voice soft with the wisdom of their shared decades. "That's the thing about tears, they clear your eyes so you can see what's worth fighting for." As twilight settled over Redemption Ranch, Virginia thought of the leather-bound journal now filled with 30 years of their story, not just the story of how a heartbroken woman and a compassionate cowboy found each other, but of how they had built something lasting and beautiful from the ashes of her grief. In the end, it wasn't a story about running away, but about finding home in the most unexpected place, with each other.